Well, if you wanted a case study of how a racing driver can put together a lap in a slightly inferior car and get the pole, then we saw it this afternoon in Miami. A brilliant pole lap by Max Verstappen. I thought it's getting to be very difficult to rate Max's pole laps over the years, but this has definitely got to be up there in my opinion. And I never thought I'd be saying that about Miami because I've always sort of pigeonholed it as a bit of a sort of boring street circuit. But no, what a lap by Max, and the way he put it together. Bearing in mind the Red Bull clearly doesn't have the same inherent efficient downforce as the McLaren for whatever reason. And the McLaren was always going to be very good in Sector 2 where there are lots of corners involving turn-in and traction, where the McLaren drivers basically just had to do a nice clean job in order to sustain an advantage there. Max had to find the advantage in Sectors 1 and 3. Sector 3 is a long straight basically with a high-speed braking area at the end of it. So the key thing there for him was to be very clean and to do what he was doing in Saudi Arabia, just getting in beautifully quite early, the way he's coming out of the brakes, the way he is patiently waiting for the throttle. And so in many ways, the heart of the lap was in Sector 1. In that section of road I talked about yesterday, going down towards Turn 7. And as Q1 turned into Q2, turned into Q3, and Max, alone with the two McLaren drivers and Charles Leclerc, was sparingly using the softs and not using too many just to have to do a time in Q1 and Q2, like, say, George Russell or Lewis Hamilton. And he had two really good laps. He just went quicker and quicker and quicker and perfected his use of short corners and the way he was using the throttle and brakes, particularly into Turn 7, giving the most unbelievable run on the straight there that followed. And that was it. After that, the McLaren drivers, who neither of them have the touch and feel of Max Verstappen, nor the ability to use short corners to shorten the corner the way Max was, particularly in Turn 7, found they were having to take more risk with late braking, getting on the power a little bit earlier, maybe clipping apices a little bit tighter in order to try to make back the time. And that's what we saw Lando Norris doing on his fastest lap. It was quite interesting, actually. When they stopped at the end of phase 1 of Q3, both Max and Lando had done a 26.4. And I have to say, I thought that was the absolute limit of the Red Bull. I never imagined he would be able to go any quicker than that. And I thought Lando was going to get the pole. And sure enough, Lando did 26.2. But that 26.2 was a blemished 26.2. In reality, I think that McLaren could have done a 26.1, 26.0, but we didn't see it from either driver. And what happened with Lando is that he got slightly squirrely as he turned in from high-speed braking at the end of Sector 3 and clunked over the apex curve just to get the car hooked in. It was uncomfortable. He lost a tenth or two there, maybe less than that, but that was enough to give Max the pole. And as for Oscar, yeah, just a little bit too much aggression with the throttle compared with Lando, particularly on the slow acceleration runs, running a little bit nearer the wall, perhaps on a little bit of road where there were some marbles, and that cost him a little bit as well. Very, very close between the two, but neither of them in the class of Max Verstappen today. Just an unbelievable lap by Max to take the pole. And all this to the background of a sprint race that happened earlier in the day in the wet. Charles Leclerc didn't even start the race. He went off on the formation lap, aquaplaned off at high speed, damaged the Ferrari, didn't race at all. The start was then delayed about 40 minutes. And then when they did start the race, it was Oscar Piastri from Lando Norris, because Kimi Antonelli's pole disappeared a little bit like Max Verstappen in Saudi Arabia at the first corner, with Oscar Piastri making a really good start on the dirty side of the grid. Of course, it didn't really matter because the track was greasy. They were all on intermediate tyres. And he's alongside Antonelli going into that corner on the inside. And Antonelli ran wide off the track and dropped 2 or 3 positions. Came back just in front of George Russell. Drove really well, actually. A lot of pressure from George. George on the radio saying, I've got the pace, I've got the pace. But Antonelli just stuck with it. Really, really good. But then fell out of any point-scoring position with an incident in the pit lane when... I don't know what's going on at Red Bull. The pit work at Red Bull definitely needs to be tighter and sharper. Is it since Jonathan Wheatley left? Anyway, rhetorical question probably. They released Max too early, right in the path of Antonelli. Right rear, took off the left front end plate of Max's Red Bull. Max got a 10-second penalty. But excellent reflexes from Kimi Antonelli. Then, having done that, he just aborted his pit stop, went straight down the pit lane and had to come in the following lap, which dropped him out of the points. But really, really nice bit of driving by Antonelli and thinking as well. Very impressive to see that. And then Fernando Alonso tangled with Liam Lawson. That brought out the safety car. Oscar Piastri had already stopped for his slicks. Lando Norris effectively timed it perfectly and inherited the win. McLaren won too, with Lewis Hamilton third in the Ferrari. He'd stopped amongst the earliest to come in for dry tyres and benefited from that. Very good drive by Lewis. Well, confidence building drive, shall we say. And we all had great hopes for him as we went into qualifying. But as it was pretty much the same. Didn't get out of Q2. Charles Leclerc did. Wasn't very quick in the Ferrari, got to say. The Ferrari's definitely struggling to get the tyres to work. But Lewis Hamilton didn't even make it out of Q2. So another very disappointing day for Lewis. So it was Max Verstappen on this amazing pole. Lando Norris second. But third, Kimi Antonelli on the last lap, continuing what we saw yesterday, what we saw effectively in the sprint race, and now looking really good in the dry in the Mercedes. P3 upstaging George Russell, who was struggling most of the qualifying session to get the tyres to work. He complained several times on the radio about lack of grip. Nothing from Antonelli, just out there doing the lap time and shorter corners than George Russell. And it really does add up around Miami. As I said yesterday, really, really nice to watch Antonelli at work today. So it's Oscar Piastri fourth. George Russell eventually qualified fifth. Carlos Sainz sixth. Very good job in the Williams, just ahead of Alex Albon. Both Williams Mercedes, very impressive throughout the 2 days in Miami, although Carlos Sainz was making up time in the sprint race from the back of the grid, but then managed to hit an apex a little bit too closely and damage the Williams on that one. Esteban Ocon, very good job to get into the top 10, qualified ninth in the Haas Ferrari, and Yuki Tsunoda did get into Q3, but he will start 10th in the other Red Bull. I think more than anything, it's just showing how good Max's lap was. Again, Yuki Tsunoda 26.9 on a new set of softs. Max Verstappen 26.2. I mean, that is a lot around one lap of Miami. Just shows what Max is doing with the car these days. Isaac Hadjar, P11, just failed to make it. It was incredibly close. If you look at the drivers that didn't make it into Q3, well, if we start with Charles Leclerc, who qualified 8th in Q2, did a 26.9. Yuki Tsunoda 26.9, so he was P9. Esteban Ocon, the last to get through to Q3, did a 26.9. And then those that didn't get through, Isaac Hadjar, 26.9. Lewis Hamilton, 27.0. Gabriele Bortoleto, 27.1. Good job by him in the Sauber. Very good job. Jack Doohan also did a good job, 27.1. And Liam Lawson, 27.3. Jack Doohan got into Q2. Pierre Gasly had a lot of traffic, did not. And Liam Lawson complaining a lot about battery issues as well on that car. So yeah, the McLaren does look to be the better race car compared with the Red Bull going into Sunday. The weather's a little bit of a question mark as well. I think the wet caught some teams by surprise. And it was, I don't know, I've got mixed feelings about it. You might say that sprint race was dramatic, lots of incidents, lots going on. At the same time, if it wasn't a sprint weekend or sprint racing had never been invented, just a practice session, certainly the Williams, Aston Martin and Ferrari mechanics wouldn't have had to have put in the hours that they did afterwards rebuilding those damaged cars. Anyway, I guess the fans would have loved it, and that's what sprint racing is all about, lots of incidents. And everybody looking forward now, of course, to tomorrow. I think from Max Verstappen's point of view, he's hoping it's going to be wet, hoping it's going to be cool. What he doesn't want is hot track temperatures, as we saw on Friday in FP1 or in practice 1, because for sure the Red Bull will be tougher on its tyres than the two McLarens. His best chances if the temperatures are cooler. But even so, it's 2 against 1. It's 2 McLarens there. And it'll be interesting to see whether McLaren play around with strategies a little bit with their two drivers to see if they can take the race to Max, maybe get him to push the tyres harder than he wants. But Max, very, very good at controlling the race. And if you look at top speeds, he's not bad either on top speeds. Definitely, he's got a top speed advantage over the McLarens. But of course, if they're in DRS range, that doesn't mean anything at all going into the race tomorrow. So Max putting that Red Bull absolutely on the line, but not in an oversteery, almost hitting the wall sort of way. In an absolute example of the perfection of managing dynamic weight, I guess is the best way of describing it. It's quite a complicated way of describing it, but that's what Max was doing. And how he found all that time in that section, particularly going into turn 7, just phenomenal. It doesn't show up on telemetry. It's all about the combination of the steering that he's giving the car at any given moment, the release of the brake pedal pressure, and of how long he's waiting to get onto the power as well. And he's doing everything with perfect timing. And the rotation, of course, absolutely perfect as well. Case study, as I said at the beginning of this video, of how to do it. And as we close, a reminder that the amazing range of REC watches includes 3 that are very closely related in terms of DNA, actual materials from the cars, to 3 of the teams that ran successfully 4 GT40s in the mid-1960s. These teams are Shelby American, Essex Wire, and Sid Taylor Racing. Carroll Shelby was larger than life. He was an amazing racing driver, very short career, discovered quite early on when he was still in his 20s that he had a bit of a heart condition, and so he retired very early, only 6 years into his career. But as he retired, he had just won Le Mans in 1959 with Aston Martin. Roy Salvadori was the co-driver, giving Aston their first win at 10 attempts at trying at Le Mans. Brilliant achievement by Carroll. And then he went on to win the Tourist Trophy with Stirling Moss in the Aston as well. And then he basically called it quits. He did do a little bit of Formula One as well, actually finished fourth, classified fourth in the Italian Grand Prix in 58 at the wheel of a 250F Maserati. Then he went back to America, and his dream always was effectively to create a Ferrari for the Americans. In other words, a Ferrari that didn't have all the frills that you had to pay for in the United States. He wanted a strong, simple chassis around which he could fit American parts, running gear, engine, gearbox, etc. And of course, that became the Shelby Cobra. But because of his success at Le Mans, it was perfect timing for Carroll to go to the Ford Motor Company in early 1962 with the concept of the Cobra, of putting that engine in the Cobra. And because that was so successful, he was then a key part of the development of the Ford GT40, winning Le Mans, of course, in 1966 with Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon, and also crossing the line just behind them, should have been a dead heat finish, Ken Miles and Denny Hulme in the other car. So Carroll Shelby, a real hero, did most of his racing wearing bib overalls because he used to be a chicken farmer, and at one stage very early in his career back in the early 50s he was a little bit late getting to the track, so he stayed in his kit for the day, arrived dressed as a chicken farmer and won the race. And of course the fans loved it, the press loved it, and thereafter it became his trademark. He didn't always wear them, but he tried to do his best. He was very, very good with the media, very, very good with the fans, as was his 10-gallon cowboy hat as well. So Carroll Shelby, one of the icons, and effectively you can have a part of that history on your wrist with the Shelby American RAC watch. The choice is yours, but details, as I say, in the description below this video. A big thanks to OEM Exclusive, Track Ninja, and to Jetcraft. Looking forward to the race tomorrow. See you then.